Chapter 1871, Fall of the Two Phoenixes. Hello, Yunming. Is there something you have to say to me? Do you have any plans recently? The voices were clearly audible across the entire battlefield, so Yunai was naturally also able to hear them, and her body began to tremble uncontrollably. You bitch. That was the time you betrayed me. Even in death, you're going to taunt me one last time? Despite what she was saying, her eyes were firmly fixed on Yunming's face. Yali was completely rooted to the spot upon seeing this, and tears were also streaming down her face at the sight of Yunming. Yunming smiled, and said I might go on a long journey for a while. Gaining knowledge through reading is one thing, but experiencing the world is a different thing entirely. I plan to go to the Dou Spirit continent and Douluo continent to see them for myself and to further my training. How long will you be gone for? Who knows? 3 years. Maybe 5 years. In any case, I'll be setting off in a few days. What's going on with you today, Ms. Leng? Call me Yaoshu. I've loved you for quite a few years now. Perhaps we won't have a chance to be together, but I hope to at least be on a first-name basis with you. You. That's right. I've loved you for a very long time. Yunming, I love you. I know I shouldn't have fallen in love with you considering the relationship between our spirit pagoda and your Shrek Academy. However, emotions are not so easy to control. I've loved you for many years already, and sometimes, I'm actually very envious of Yulai. At least she's able to express her feelings, but I can't. I didn't dare to say anything as I represent not just myself, but my entire family. But if I continue to keep quiet, perhaps I would never get another chance. Yunming, All of a sudden, she stepped forward before locking him in a tight embrace, holding on with all her might as if she were afraid of being pushed away. Len Yulai's teeth had already bitten into her bottom lip, and due to her fury, her circulation was being quickened, causing blood to flow incessantly out of her chest. But she paid that no heed. She could still clearly recall that this was the scene that had made her turn to the darkness and join the Holy Spirit cult. Meanwhile, the mental manifestation continued, and Len Yulai was forced to relive the rest of this painful memory. Thank you for not pushing me away. I can tell that Yali is the woman you love. She really is the most kind-hearted woman in the world, and she is deserving of your love. Hence, I'm not saying all of this with any expectations. I just couldn't hold back the urge to get all of this off my chest before I turn 30. Please don't. Give me a response. There's no need to reject me because I already understand everything. I just don't want to hear it from you. Please leave me with this final beautiful memory. Yunming heaved a faint sigh as he shook his head in a fallen manner. What's so good about me anyway? I told you not to say anything. Please, listen to what I have to say, and once I'm done, I'll leave. Yulai is different from me. Her love for you is more intense than mine. In the eyes of others, she's very extreme in her personality, but I know that her heart is very brittle. She should have been the heir to our family, but our seniors didn't understand her, so they passed the position down to me. She's very vulnerable and requires more care. After you rejected her, it was as if she had become a completely different person. If it's possible, please make some room for her in your heart. Even the tiniest bit of space is fine, as long as you can afford her some love and compassion. She's my little sister, and I don't want to see her continue to be tormented like this. I can sacrifice and discard everything, but I don't want to see her keep living like this. Len Yaoshu's face was slightly pale as she continued. I don't know what's come over me today, but this what I've been harboring in my heart all this time. If you can squeeze out any additional love for any other woman, then please give it to Yulai. I beg of you. The image gradually began to blur, and even Len Yaoshu's last sentence wasn't clearly conveyed. Right at this moment, Yuna suddenly let loose a grief-stricken cry. Teacher. The pristine white flames vanished, and with it went Len Yaoshu's body as well. The vice-chairman of the Spirit Pagoda and the woman who had loved Yunming all her life had left this world forever. Yali stared blankly at the spot in the sky where the projections had been unfolding, and her heart was filled with complex emotions. Truth be told, there was a point where she had been very jealous of Len Yaoshu, all because Yunming had once made the remark to her that Len Yaoshu was a fine woman. At the time, she was still very prone to getting jealous as her man was simply far too exceptional. Now, she finally understood why Yunming had said that. Len Yaoshu truly deserved such praise. Len Yulai was also staring blankly up at the sky, and she was completely rooted to the spot like a wooden statue. No one could empathize with her current emotions. Never did she think that the event that had ruined her life and filled her heart with so much hatred would be nothing more than a misunderstanding. Her sister had worked up the courage to approach Yunming not just to confess, but also for her sake. She was trying to leave that final shred of hope for her. How could this be? How could this be? Len Yulai shook her head vigorously, unable to come to terms with what she had just seen. She felt as if her brain had completely short-circuited. She had always thought that her sister's kindness was feigned, that it was nothing more than a facade that she used to please their seniors so she would be made the next family leader. Due to her extreme personality, the more she delved into those thoughts, the worse her perception of her sister became. However, mental manifestations wouldn't lie, particularly not mental manifestations conjured up by her sister's last remaining life force. In her condition, there was no way she would have been capable of fabricating those projections. All she would have been able to do was project her memories exactly as they were. As such, this was the undeniable truth, and her reason for turning to the darkness simply didn't exist. Everything that her sister had done was for her sake. A heartbroken look appeared on Len Yulai's face as she cast her gaze toward the spot where her sister had just disappeared, and she suddenly heaved a long sigh. In the next instant, a burst of bright purple flames erupted over her body, burning violently to incinerate her into ashes in the blink of an eye. Mental manifestation projections appeared in the sky once again, depicting two little girls running over a massive grassland as their tinkling laughter echoed over the landscape. With that, both Heavenly Phoenix Dulo Len Yaoshu and Dark Phoenix Dulo Len Yulai had perished. This sudden turn of events was astonishing to everyone on the battlefield, and no one had anticipated that this would happen. Yuna's eyes were burning with fury. Having just killed the Spirit Sovereign, she had intended to conceal her power again in order to draw less attention, but Len Yaoshu's death had dealt her an extremely heavy blow, and her heart was filled with hatred toward the Holy Spirit cult. Chapter 1872, Wounding Infernal Emperor again. All of a sudden, she leapt up into the air, and she arched back like a drawn bow before hurling her silver dragon spear toward the abyssal passageway like a bolt of white lightning. Following the violent tremors, the abyssal passageway was only just beginning to return to a stable state, and it was able to begin devouring the abyssal energy on the battlefield again. However, right at this moment, the silver dragon spear descended, forcibly devouring a huge amount of abyssal energy. Furthermore, the spear was aimed directly at one of the two emperors of the Holy Spirit cult, Infernal King Dulo Harissa. At this moment, Harissa was facing Yuan and Zenshin in battle. Not long ago, Yuan and Zenshin would have been no match for Harissa, but after receiving guidance from Ming, Yuan and Zenshin had made significant improvements. He still couldn't match a veteran quasi-god like Harissa, but he was able to hold his own for some time. After all, one had to remember that he possessed a suit of four-word battle armor crafted for him by Tang Wolin. The Titan giant ape martial soul had exceptional defensive prowess to begin with, and that was further enhanced by his four-word battle armor, thereby making for a watertight defense that even Harissa was struggling to crack. Right at this moment, the silver dragon spear shot forth directly toward him, and he was instantly struck by an overwhelming sense of peril. Having just devoured a massive amount of abyssal energy, the silver dragon spear was glowing with scintillating light, and what threatened him the most was a fearsome spiritual aura imbued within the spear. This was a spiritual aura of such a high caliber that it was exerting immense pressure even onto him. His spiritual power had reached the pinnacle of the spirit domain realm long ago, but he still hadn't managed to take that step to ascend to the divine origin realm. However, this didn't affect his ability to identify divine origin realm spiritual power, and in this perilous situation, he immediately took action. He slashed his infernal king sword through the air, conjuring up countless projections as an infernal hell descended around him. He forced back Yuan and Zenshin, and at the same time, the 12 Death Cavaliers arranged themselves into a line right in front of him. Harissa reached out and laid his left hand onto the back of the last Death Cavalier in the line. An enormous infernal energy instantly erupted forth, connecting him with the 12 Death Cavaliers. The Death Cavalier at the front of the line was also wielding a spear, and it made an upward swiping motion in the face of the oncoming silver dragon spear. However, no clash took place, and the first Death Cavalier's body instantly shuddered, creating a chain reaction that sent tremors running through all of the subsequent Death Cavaliers. Harissa's expression changed drastically, and he instantly hurried back in retreat while defending himself with his infernal king sword. But Yuna had held the spear with a vengeance, and it had just been enhanced by an enormous amount of abyssal energy, so it was no so easy to withstand. Clang! The Infernal King sword blocked the Silver Dragon Spear head-on, but in the next instant, the sword was snapped, and the sharp point of the sword instantly pierced into Harris's shoulder. The Silver Dragon Spear was deflected a little, but it still had considerable momentum, and it pierced through his chest to the right amid a huge spurt of blood. Thankfully for Harris, this was the Silver Dragon Spear, which was more geared toward elemental enhancement. If he had been stabbed by the Golden Dragon Spear instead, then he truly would have been severely debilitated, if not killed. Harris let loose an agonized cry, and he instantly disintegrated into grey energy that dispersed in all directions to flee from Yuan and Zenshin. Meanwhile, the Silver Dragon Spear vanished on the spot, and when it reappeared, it had already returned to Yuna's grasp. Standing still in the sky, Yuna was like an immovable monarch ruling over the entire battlefield, and everyone was thoroughly stunned by the power of that spear strike. She had just slain the Spirit Sovereign, and now, she had inflicted severe wounds on Infernal Emperor. Her reputation was instantly elevated to unprecedented heights, surpassing even that of Tang Wuling. Yuna's gaze was icy cold, and in the next instant, she turned her attention toward Ghost Emperor. As soon as he was locked in her sights, Ghost Emperor felt a chill run down his spine. He thought he had extensive knowledge on the state of the current Soulmaster world, but he had no idea where Yuna had come from. Since when was there such a powerful being in the Spirit Pagoda? Surely she wouldn't be much less powerful than even the true god Demon Sovereign. Furthermore, Tang Wuling was already able to oppose Demon Sovereign, and in light of all of this, the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. In the wake of the Spirit Sovereign's death, the Abyssal army had completely fallen apart, and despite their enormous numbers, they were nowhere near as threatening as before. Most importantly, the powerful beings of the human race were far more formidable than they had expected. Yuna took a deep breath to compose herself. She knew that this wasn't the time to be putting herself under the limelight like this. She slowly put down her Silver Dragon Spear, then sat down on the ground with her legs crossed, pretending that she had to recover her energy. There were still many abyssal creatures on the battlefield, but not a single abyssal creature dared to come within a kilometer of her, and that was sufficient testament to just how stunning her display of power had been. Without the presence of the three Spirit Dragon Kings, Wu Zhangkong and the others were finally able to reclaim the first mountain that had been taken over by the Abyssal army, and they were able to stabilize the defensive line with the assistance of the air units. She emerged out of thin air before turning to look at Yuna in the distance with a stunned expression. When did Yue become so powerful? I reckon she's even more powerful than Boss. Yuan and Yui glared at him in response. So what if us women are powerful? She's always been a little ahead of Boss. She sighed. I only hope that she won't abandon Boss now that she's the chairwoman of the Spirit Pagoda. If she does that, I can only imagine how heartbroken Boss would be. Everyone else was also rather concerned upon hearing this. They had all witnessed Leng Yaoshu and Leng Yuli's mental manifestations, and at the very core of all of these issues, love was the primary instigating factor. Shrek's 6 monsters were comprised of 3 pairs of lovers, and as they looked into one another's eyes, they developed a greater sense of appreciation for each other. Misunderstandings really were the cruelest things in this world. Wu Zhangkong's eyes were also filled with sorrow. If only she was still by his side. His eyes narrowed slightly as he cast his gaze toward a figure in the sky, and burning fury was instantly ignited in his heart. The 4 heavenly monarchs of the Holy Spirit cult were comprised of Dark Blood Demon, Dark Phoenix, Dark Bell, and Dark Hummingbird, and this Dark Hummingbird was the person Wu Zhangkong hated more than anyone else in this world. As the leader of this group, he had to focus on the greater good and stabilize the second defensive line first. In reality, he had already caught sight of that abhorrent man as the 4 heavenly monarchs emerged with Demon Sovereign. Even though it had been many years since their last encounter, the intense hatred was still fresh in his heart. If it weren't for him, Longbing wouldn't have died, and he wouldn't have left Shrek Academy as a result. In a sense, he had betrayed the academy in the past, but not only had his teacher not punished him, he had been welcomed back with open arms. Among the 4 heavenly monarchs, Dark Hummingbird was ranked second only to Dark Blood Demon. Chapter 1873, Dark Hummingbird. Dark Hummingbird was a handsome middle-aged man, and he was also Longbing's father. That's right, the woman that Wu Zhangkong had fallen so deeply in love with was the daughter of an evil soulmaster. At the time, he had been unaware of this. Instead of inheriting the Dark Hummingbird martial soul, Longbing had inherited her mother's martial soul, but ever since she was a child, Dark Hummingbird had been trying to put her onto the path of becoming an evil soulmaster. As one of the 4 heavenly monarchs of the Holy Spirit cult, Dark Hummingbird treated even his own daughter as nothing more than a tool. He raised his daughter and used the fact that her martial soul didn't belong to an evil soulmaster to his advantage. He made her enroll in Shrek Academy, and she was in the same cohort as Wu Zhangkong. They were in the same class, and both of them were top students. Having lived under the shadow of an evil soulmaster all her life, Longbing was always very cold and forbidding, but she was very beautiful, and due to the seating arrangement in class, Wu Zhangkong sat next to her every day. During their lessons, he would inevitably catch sight of the beautiful figure sitting next to him, and at some point, her image had been branded deep into his heart. After entering Shrek Academy, Longbing's state of mind began to change. For the first time, she came to realize that there was such a place in the human world that wasn't entirely cruel and cold. She discovered that the ideals that her father had drilled into her from birth weren't entirely correct. She saw with her very own eyes students helping one another and even taking attacks for their companions. She saw everyone develop from fellow students to friends in a joyful family-like environment. Time slowly passed by, and all of this was influencing her personality in subtle ways. No one was born evil, not even evil soulmasters. Besides, she wasn't an evil soulmaster, and she had a very kind heart. However, Dark Hummingbird naturally had an ulterior motive for planting her in Shrek Academy, which was to make her collect information on the academy. At the same time, she was to do her best to make it into the inner court so she would have access to more of Shrek Academy's secrets. Longbing became very conflicted and began to detest her mission, and it was at this point in time that Wu Zhangkong began to make an impression on her. In a group sparring session, they were coincidentally put in the same group. Even though Longbing was very beautiful, her cold demeanor meant that she had virtually no friends, and even male students refrained from approaching her. At the time, both of them were in the primes of their youth, and they began to cultivate and train together. Wu Zhangkong had always been one of the top performers of their class, and at the time, he was still an exuberant and enthusiastic young man. Longbing was slowly infected by his exuberance, and the two of them naturally grew closer and closer. Upon graduating from the outer court, Wu Zhangkong swore a vow to the heavens that he would do everything in his power to become a 4-word battle armor master, and that the name of his 4-word battle armor would be Sky Frost Dragon Ice. Longbing fell hopelessly in love with him, but on one side was the joy and exhilaration of first love, while on the other side was the constant mounting pressure from her father. Once they entered the inner court, Dark Hummingbird began to make more and more demands of her, ordering her to steal more information from Shrek Academy. By then, Longbing was already extremely averse to all of this, but she couldn't just not listen to her father. She was irrevocably in love with Wu Zhangkong and Shrek Academy, but at the same time, she was naturally well aware of her own roots. She didn't dare to tell anyone about her father, even Wu Zhangkong, as she was afraid that she would lose her lover and everything that she derived joy from. Thus, she could only continue to live in constant pain and conflict while carefully carrying out her father's orders. However, it was not meant to be. Shrek Academy was the #1 academy on the continent, and there was no lack of titled Douluos in the academy, especially in the inner court. One time, when she was stealing files from Shrek Academy's database, she was caught red-handed. As Longbing's lover, Wu Zhangkong was naturally stunned to discover this, and he shielded her with his own body, frantically promising his teacher that there was no way she would do something like steal information from Shrek Academy. Meanwhile, Longbing merely wept in silence. In the face of the concrete evidence, the reality was undeniable, regardless of how unwilling Wu Zhangkong was to believe it. However, Longbing hadn't incurred any substantial damage to the academy, so in the end, it was decided that she would merely be expelled. On the day that she left, Wu Zhangkong stubbornly went against Zhuoshu's wishes and decided to leave with her. Thus, both of them left the academy that they had grown to love so dearly. When weighing up the person that he loved and the place that he loved, he chose the former in the end. However, they had only just emerged from Shrek City before Dark Hummingbird arrived. He first denounced Longbing as useless and worthless, then set his sights on Wu Zhangkong. Only then did Wu Zhangkong realize that he had been wrong, that Longbing really was a spy planted in the academy by an evil soulmaster. He had fallen in love with the daughter of an evil soulmaster, and she had been lying to him this entire time. The agony in his heart was unbearable, and he asked Longbing why over and over again. However, Longbing wasn't in any less pain than he was. Through their interaction, it became apparent to Dark Hummingbird that the two of them shared a special relationship. All those who managed to make it into Shrek Academy were exceptional prodigies, so he immediately tried to lure Wu Zhangkong to his side, telling him that he would allow Wu Zhangkong to be with his daughter if he agreed to replace her as a spy in Shrek Academy. However, Wu Zhangkong was too proud, and he was still fuming from discovering his lover's deceit, so he vowed to choose death before surrender. Thus, Dark Hummingbird decided to kill him before taking Longbing away. At the time, Wu Zhangkong was already an inner court disciple and had become quite powerful, but he was naturally no match for Dark Hummingbird, one of the 4 heavenly monarchs. After just a few exchanges, he was already severely wounded. Right as Dark Hummingbird was about to land the killing blow, Longbing threw herself in front of Wu Zhangkong Kong and took the lethal blow for him. Dark Hummingbird was momentarily rooted to the spot at the sight of his daughter falling to the ground, but as opposed to trying to save her, he merely turned and left, leaving Long Bing on the brink of death. She fell into Wu Zhangkong's arms, and with her dying breaths, she finally told him everything. In the end, she passed away in Wu Zhangkong's arms, suffering a tragic and premature end to her life right as she was entering her prime. Prior to her death, Long Bing held tightly onto Wu Zhangkong's hand, imploring him not to avenge her. Regardless of what Dark Hummingbird had done, he was still her father. This was why Wu Zhangkong later went to a seaside city to become a teacher. Even though his heart was filled with hatred, he chose to abide by Long Bing's dying request. However, upon seeing Dark Hummingbird on this battlefield and thinking back to what he had done, the hatred in Wu Zhangkong's heart was ready to explode. How irredeemable did one have to be to kill even their own daughter? Even if it weren't for Long Bing's sake, he should kill this vile man here for the greater good. Chapter 1874. Do you still remember me? With that in mind, Wu Zhangkong spread open his wings and sped directly toward Dark Hummingbird with an ice-cold aura around him. In contrast with Wu Zhangkong, who recognized Dark Hummingbird right away, Dark Hummingbird failed to recognize Wu Zhangkong. Compared to back then, Wu Zhangkong had grown up, and he was encased in his suit of four-word battle armor. Dark Hummingbird had just forced back a powerful being from the spirit pagoda and was about to pursue his opponent when he sensed an extremely cold aura lock onto him where he reflexively turned to see the approaching Wu Zhangkong. Skyfrost Dragon Ice was a pristine white suit of battle armor, and Wu Zhangkong had specifically requested this color from Tang Wuling as it had been Long Bing's favorite color. She had once expressed a yearning to Wu Zhangkong for all people to be as pure and pristine as ice and snow. Wielding his blue long sword and wearing his suit of four-word battle armor, not only was Wu Zhangkong giving off an extremely powerful aura, he was also breathtakingly handsome, to the point that even Dark Hummingbird felt slightly dazzled at the sight of him. Do you remember me, Dark Hummingbird? Wu Zhangkong asked in a cold voice. Dark Hummingbird faltered slightly upon hearing this, and a hint of befuddlement appeared in his eyes, but he quickly retreated while keeping up his guard. He was a rank 98 hyper Dulo with only a suit of three-word battle armor, while this man was clearly wearing a suit of four-word battle armor. Under the enhancement of the four-word battle armor, this man's powers definitely wouldn't be inferior to his own. Who are you? Wu Zhangkong's eyes gradually turned bloodshot as he roared. Who am I? Do you remember the daughter that you killed with your own two hands? Dark Hummingbird faltered slightly upon hearing this, but he then finally recalled who Wu Zhangkong was. You're that little ice sword wielding rascal, he exclaimed. Wu Zhangkong tightened his grip around his Skyfrost sword, and a frosty look appeared in his eyes. Dark Hummingbird's eyes narrowed slightly as he scoffed. Long Bing died for you, but you seem to be doing quite well for yourself. You've even got a suit of four-word battle armor. Looks like I shouldn't have spared you. I should have killed you right there and then. Wu Zhangkong pursed his lips tightly as the aura around him grew even colder. Dark Hummingbird, have you ever repented for Long Bing's death? Even right before she died, she was still begging me not to avenge her just because you're her father. A hint of barely detectable emotion flashed through Dark Hummingbird's eyes upon hearing this, but that quickly disappeared. She was an idiot. If you had come to me to seek revenge earlier, you wouldn't be standing before me right now. You'd already be a corpse, and I would have been spared a lot of trouble. Wu Zhangkong murmured to himself. Long Bing, do you see now? This man has no remorse, nor any redeeming features. He has no right to be your father. He brought you into this world, but all he gave you was pain. As one of the four heavenly monarchs, countless innocent lives have perished by his hands. Even if it isn't for you, I'm going to kill him today for the greater good. As he was speaking, two streaks of light suddenly shot forth toward him with vicious intent. Dark Hummingbird's weapons were a pair of sharp grey spikes that were laced with lethal poison. They were his martial soul, his stingers. He was an agility attack system soul master, and his forte was speed, which was why he had been given the nickname of Dark Hummingbird. Wu Zhangkong's body suddenly took on an illusory appearance, and the two stingers flashed past the spot where he had been standing just a moment ago, but they struck only an illusion. This was the Tang Sex Ghost Shadow perplexing track. At the same time, a series of icy blue lines began to appear all over the battlefield. These frosty lines formed a dense net in the sky, making it impossible for Dark Hummingbird to advance. Assault system soul masters held an inherent advantage over agility attack system soul masters, and even setting that aside, Wu Zhangkong had never been slow. Dark Hummingbird was moving at a high speed, and one frosty line after another was destroyed by his stingers, but he was also slowed down in the process. However, as one of the four heavenly monarchs, he had extremely extensive battle experience, and he was able to make rapid adjustments on the fly. Instead of forcing the issue, he was patiently searching for openings. Wu Zhangkong slashed his Skyfrost sword through the air, and a thin layer of icy mist began to disperse in all directions through the air. Under the cover of the icy mist, the frosty lines seemed to have sprung to life and began to surge through the air like darting fish, making them more unpredictable, and they had also become more powerful. A grim look appeared on Dark Hummingbird's face. It was clear to him that Wu Zhangkong was only using low-tier soul skills, but he was already able to utilize them to such great effect, which indicated that he was an exceptional soul master. He withdrew his stingers, and a pair of transparent wings began to flap on his back amid a low buzzing sound. Due to the vibrational sound waves, the surrounding icy mist was unable to get close to him, and in the next instant, a cold look flashed through his eyes as sound waves erupted around him, scattering the surrounding frosty lines as he shot forth through the air like a shooting star. In the blink of an eye, he had already emerged from the frosty lines, and his pair of stingers were about to plunge into Wu Zhangkong's chest. It was as if a turbo booster had suddenly appeared on his back, allowing him to accelerate at an incredible rate, even setting off a sonic boom in the process. The sound of the sonic boom had affected Wu Zhangkong's sense of hearing, and before he knew it, Dark Hummingbird was already upon him. This was Dark Hummingbird's fifth soul skill, Gale Cannon, and it was also his favorite soul skill that could raise his speed to the very max in an instant, making it extremely useful for both attacking or fleeing. Many soul masters could reach high speeds, but that required a process. However, Gale Cannon required no such process. It was able to instantly raise his speed to an incredible extent through soul power propulsion. Wu Zhangkong had indeed been caught off guard. During their last encounter, he had been too weak to force Dark Hummingbird into using any powerful soul skills. This soul skill was one of Dark Hummingbird's trump cards, and it was an ability that had won him countless battles. In the face of this sudden development, Wu Zhangkong could only use his Skyfrost sword as a shield. The pair of stingers struck the Skyfrost sword amid a crisp clang, and the tremendous force of the impact sent his Skyfrost sword crashing back into the breastplate of his battle armor. Wu Zhangkong gave a muffled groan as he shot back through the air, while Dark Hummingbird spun around to absorb the force of the impact before unleashing his fifth soul skill again, accelerating at close quarters on this occasion. Wu Zhangkong had only been sent flying for less than 20 meters when Gale Cannon was unleashed a second time, and Dark Hummingbird arrived before him again in the blink of an eye, stabbing his stingers viciously toward Wu Zhangkong's eyes. For a battle armor master, the most vulnerable part of their body had to be their eyes. This was Dark Hummingbird's true objective from the very beginning, and following that last clash, Wu Zhangkong's sword-wielding right arm was already completely numb. Even though he was quickly recovering feeling within the arm, his opponent was far too fast, and there wasn't enough time to fully recover. Chapter 1875, Wu Zhangkong versus Dark Hummingbird. I've got him. In Dark Hummingbirds' eyes, Wu Zhangkong was still too green and inexperienced. Even with a suit of four-word battle armor, he couldn't make the advantage felt, and he was unable to withstand this ultra-aggressive assault. If Wu Zhangkong wanted to block this attack, he would have to use his other arm as there definitely wasn't enough time to evade. Even if he could only injure one of Wu Zhangkong's arms, Dark Hummingbird would have completed his objective. With one of Wu Zhangkong's arms disabled, he was confident that he would slowly grind him down and gain an even bigger advantage over time. However, much to his surprise, Wu Zhangkong didn't use his arm to defend himself. Right as Dark Hummingbird was closing in on him, he saw a hint of mockery flash through Wu Zhangkong's eyes for an instant. The two of them were in extremely close proximity, and Dark Hummingbird's stingers almost instantly reached Wu Zhangkong. However, all Wu Zhangkong did in response was close his eyes. Regardless of how fast Dark Hummingbird's Gale Cannon was, it certainly wasn't faster than Wu Zhangkong closing his eyes. As his eyes fell shut, a metal visor instantly descended from Wu Zhangkong's helmet to protect his face. A crisp clang rang out, and Wu Zhangkong's head was immediately thrown back. Even his entire body was falling backward from the impact of the strike. However, as he fell back, he used the momentum of his fall to slash his sword upward in a vicious strike. Clang! A vast expanse of purplish black light erupted out of Dark Hummingbird's three-word battle armor, but even so, a massive gash was still sliced into it by the Skyfrost sword. What was even more alarming to Dark Hummingbird was that a burst of extreme cold was surging into his body in a frenzy, and a layer of frost instantly appeared on the surface of his suit of three-word battle armor. Why is he using such a dangerous fighting style? That was only a visor. If it failed to withstand my pincers, wouldn't he already be dead right now? Unbeknownst to him, this was a calculated risk that Wu Zhangkong had taken. During their first clash, even though Wu Zhangkong had been forced back, he had taken the opportunity to assess his opponent's offensive power in comparison with the tolerance of his own battle armor. As the second attack arrived, Wu Zhangkong's wings had folded upward from the back to protect his helmet, which meant that as he was struck by the attack, he wasn't using his own spine to absorb the impact. Instead, his helmet, his pauldrons, his breastplate, and his wings had all quickly connected together to share the load. He had chosen to do this as he wanted to end this battle as quickly as possible. The survival of the human race hinged on this battle, and the more enemies he could kill, the greater the chances of securing victory. The other reason why he had chosen Dark Hummingbird as his opponent was that even though evil soul masters were very powerful, they were unable to revive like abyssal creatures could. Thus, with each evil soul master that was killed, substantial damage would be dealt to the Holy Spirit cult, and that was why Wu Zhangkong was determined to defeat Dark Hummingbird as quickly as possible. It seemed that he was doing something very reckless, but it was actually very much premeditated. It was true that he couldn't accelerate as explosively as Dark Hummingbird could, but that didn't mean that his speed was lacking. Some of these techniques were ones that he had developed from sparring with Tang Wulin. If one wanted to defeat an opponent in a short time, particularly an opponent that was equal or superior in power to oneself, then the best way to proceed would be to make it impossible for the opponent to unleash all of their power. He had used his face, which seemed to be the most vulnerable region of his body, to withstand an unavoidable attack, and given that this was premeditated, it was a very good option. In the end, Dark Hummingbird had underestimated Wu Zhangkong. The current Wu Zhangkong was no longer the young man who was at his mercy, and thus, Dark Hummingbird immediately fell into a dire situation. Not only had a huge gash been torn into his battle armor by the Skyfrost sword, Wu Zhangkong's absolute zero had also been injected into his body. In the blink of an eye, Dark Hummingbird's blood was frozen in his veins. Wu Zhangkong's attack was enhanced by his suit of four-word battle armor, and Dark Hummingbird's three-word battle armor was only able to keep out part of the power of the attack. This brief period during which Dark Hummingbird was frozen and paralyzed was already enough for Wu Zhangkong. From a third-person perspective, one would see that Wu Zhangkong's head had been thrown back by Dark Hummingbird's attack, but at the same time, Dark Hummingbird also fell prey to Wu Zhangkong's attack. Furthermore, a layer of ice appeared over the entire surface of his three-word battle armor, and he was temporarily completely immobilized. Right as Wu Zhangkong's body was beginning to resemble an arch bridge, he flapped his wings vigorously, and he was instantly propelled toward Dark Hummingbird, who had been frozen into an ice statue at this point. Frost on Ice Wheel. Wu Zhangkong's fifth soul skill conjured up a wheel of 9 massive Skyfrost swords, each of which struck Dark Hummingbird one after the other with vicious power. Not only that, but Wu Zhangkong was also unleashing his sixth soul skill, Condensing Frost. Condensing Frost's effect was that it was able to lengthen the duration of absolute zero, and thus, Dark Hummingbird bore the full brunt of Frost on Ice Wheel. With each sword that struck Dark Hummingbird's body, Wu Zhangkong seemed to be venting a part of his fury and hatred. His hatred toward Dark Hummingbird and his remorse toward Longbing, both of which had burdened his heart for so many years, were unleashed in this attack. He solely regretted not getting to know Longbing better and finding out the truth earlier. If he had made the effort to find out everything about her, perhaps she wouldn't have died. At the very least, they wouldn't have left Shrek City so easily, and as long as they remained in Shrek City, there was no way that Dark Hummingbird would have dared to come after them. Unfortunately, there was no way to go back in time. He hadn't broken his promise to Longbing as he currently wasn't avenging her. Instead, he was striking against the Holy Spirit cult for the sake of all of humanity. With the emergence of the Blood River Godslayer array, everyone immediately realized that the Holy Spirit cult had to be completely destroyed. Otherwise, who knew how many more lives would be taken by them? Boom. Dark Hummingbird was slammed out of the sky and crashed heavily onto the ground, having been struck head-on by every single one of those 9 giant swords. Wu Zhangkong's risky battle plan had allowed him to severely wound his opponent in the shortest time possible. He descended from the heavens, and his Skyfrost sword had already transformed into a giant sword as he thrust it directly toward Dark Hummingbird with unstoppable might. Clang! Massive cracks appeared in the earth. At the center of the cracks, Dark Hummingbird was only just barely keeping Wu Zhangkong's Skyfrost sword at bay with his pair of pincers. He had only just recovered from the effects of absolute zero, and he had even been forced to detonate his own suit of three-word battle armor to accomplish this. Chapter 1876. I killed him in the end. His entire body was trembling, and blood was pouring out of all of his orifices, while his battle armor was in shambles. He and Wu Zhangkong were virtually identical in power to begin with, but Wu Zhangkong's four-word battle armor provided him with enhancements that were far too significant. The disparity in their battle armor placed Dark Hummingbird at a huge disadvantage, and having sustained such severe injuries, there was no way he would be able to turn the tables. Longbing. For Longbing's sake, you can't kill me. He implored as he looked up at Wu Zhangkong, but his fingers were slowly being forced lower and lower by the Skyfrost sword. A furious look appeared in Wu Zhangkong's eyes. You have no right to say her name. Did you ever see her as your daughter? In your eyes, she was only ever a tool, perhaps only a slightly more trustworthy tool at best. If you had harbored even a shred of love for her, you wouldn't have hurt her like that, then abandoned her to die. If it weren't for the fact that I was also severely wounded at the time, or if you just had the tiniest shred of human decency, one of us could have taken her back to Shrek Academy, and she could have been saved. Tears were already shimmering in Wu Zhangkong's eyes as he spoke. At the time, both he and Longbing had been severely wounded, and after telling him everything, Longbing fainted from her injuries. The number 1 healing system Soulmaster was situated right in Shrek Academy, and if Longbing could have been taken to Yali, then she would have definitely been saved. However, Dark Hummingbird had left without so much as a backward glance, and Wu Zhangkong had done everything in his power to get Longbing the treatment she needed, but he was only able to crawl for about 20 meters with Longbing on his back before he also fainted, leaving a trail of blood behind him. When he woke up again, Longbing was already dead, and he was also plagued by severe chronic internal injuries. This was why Wu Zhangkong had still only been a Soul Emperor when Tang Wulin first met him. Only after he returned to Shrek Academy and had those chronic injuries treated by Yali did he recover his aptitude, thereby allowing him to progress rapidly once again. At one point, he was considered to be the likeliest heir to the Sea God's Pavilion Master. Not only did Wu Zhangkong's heart not waver in the slightest upon hearing Dark Hummingbird mention Longbing, he only became even more determined to kill this abhorrent man. What kind of father could be so cruel even to his own daughter? For the sake of all of humanity and Longbing, it's time for you to die. Wu Zhangkong roared as his battle armor glowed with scintillating light, and he plunged down his Skyfrost sword with all his might. The stingers were snapped, and the Skyfrost sword was plunged viciously into Dark Hummingbird's chest. Even in the instant that he perished, Dark Hummingbird's eyes were wide open as he stared up at Wu Zhangkong. Perhaps it was remorse or perhaps it was indignation, but a tear slowly slid down his face. In that instant, it was as if he could see that little girl again, the one who would uneasily cling onto his leg and call him father. It was as if he could see the same little girl who would persist in her cultivation through gritted teeth under his constant scolding. All of the memories gradually faded into darkness, and Dark Hummingbird permanently left this world. Wu Zhangkong was panting heavily as bursts of sharp pain radiated through his body from his spine. That final attack had still injured him to a certain extent, but at this moment, the physical pain was nothing compared with the pain in his heart. I'm sorry, Longbing, I wasn't able to keep my promise to you and killed him in the end. Did you see the tear he shed? Perhaps he was finally feeling some remorse for everything he did. If reincarnation exists, I pray that you won't be his daughter again, and that he'll be reborn as a good and kind man. Tears were already streaming down his face as he spoke. A tight knot had existed in his heart for so many years, yet it had been completely loosened with the death of Dark Hummingbird. At this point, the situation on the battlefield was already trending more and more toward a positive direction for the human army. Tang Wulin was able to defeat Demon Sovereign, but he was able to keep her occupied, and without the leadership of the Abyssal Spirit Dragons, the Abyssal army was nothing more than a massive horde of abyssal creatures that were only capable of charging ahead recklessly. In the face of the Blood God Legion and the infrasonic aircrafts led by Jiang Wanyu, countless abyssal creatures were quickly being killed, and the Abyssal army was being forced back further and further by the minute. Tang Wulin was currently unable to enter the battle, but Yuna was like an untouchable deity on the battlefield. Abyssal creatures were dropping like flies in her presence, and her silver dragon spear was devouring massive quantities of of abyssal energy. Under her leadership, 6 abyssal emperors had already fallen to her silver dragon spear in a short time, and one resounding boom after another rang out from the abyssal passageway, clearly indicating that more abyssal levels were collapsing. Meanwhile, Zhang Xin was engaged in a battle of white-hot intensity with his opponent. The Holy Spirit cult was a sworn enemy of the Tang sect and Shrek Academy, so as soon as the powerful beings of the Holy Spirit cult emerged, Zhang Xin immediately went after Dark Blood Demon, while Cao Daja challenged Ghost Emperor. Dark Blood Demon was a tall and thin middle-aged man whose entire body was concealed within a large dark red cloak. His martial soul was very peculiar. It was a dark red vengeful spirit, which was the so-called Blood Demon that his nickname was derived from. Dark Blood Demon was also a limit Dulo of the demigod level, and his powers were of a virtually identical level to Zhang Xin, so their battle was extremely fierce. Dark Blood Demon excelled in casting all types of curses, making him a difficult opponent for any soulmaster. This wasn't the first time the two of them had clashed, and it was none other than Dark Blood Demon who had been responsible for the deaths of Tang Wulin's foster parents. Among the 4 heavenly monarchs, Dark Blood Demon was renowned for being mysterious and untraceable. At this moment, there was a dark red figure with an inky black face standing behind him. The figure was roughly 3 meters tall, and it had a pair of fiery red eyes that were burning like flames. The 9 soul rings around him were all black, and they seemed to fuse as one his black and red color scheme. The vengeful spirit wasn't humanoid in shape. Instead, it appeared to be in the shape of a miniature mound, and even the air around it seemed to be slowly being corrupted by its presence. Dark Blood Demon was definitely the purest type of evil soul master. When his martial soul first awakened, it was very weak, and no soul power arose within him, so it appeared to be a trash martial soul that couldn't be cultivated. As a result, Dark Blood Demon was often made fun of by his peers, particularly those who had successfully awakened martial souls and soul power. His parents had passed away when he was still a child, and it was his grandfather who had raised him, but his grandfather also passed away due to illness when he was 8 years old. It was following his grandfather's passing that Dark Blood Demon's life began to take a turn. On the day that his grandfather passed away, his martial soul suddenly appeared on its own. At the time, his martial soul had resembled a ball of air, and it made a devouring motion toward his grandfather's corpse. After that, something seemed to have been sucked out of his grandfather's body, and he could even hear his grandfather's cries of agony, but he didn't know what was going on. In the wake of that incident, his martial soul displayed itself for the first time, and it was a malicious vengeful spirit. After devouring his grandfather's soul, the vengeful spirit took on a faint red hue, finally making it somewhat visible. What was even more surprising to him was that a burst of unprecedented energy had appeared in his body following that incident. Chapter 1877, Spirit Devouring. Dark Blood Demon was stunned by that incident, and only later on did he discover that the energy was soul power. After devouring his grandfather's soul, he had attained 1 rank of soul power. At the time, his first reaction was that this was a present left to him by his grandfather, and he was ecstatic to finally have soul power. He went to an elementary soulmaster academy and was accepted as he now possessed soul power, but he quickly discovered that all soulmaster cultivation methods, including the likes of meditation, were unsuitable for him. Thus, even after cultivating for half a year, his pitiful single rank of soul power didn't increase in the slightest, and as a result, he was expelled. At the time, Dark Blood Demon suddenly recalled how he had obtained this 1 rank of soul power. Could it be that it had something to do with deceased individuals? With that in mind, he went to a funeral parlor and lingered there for a while. During that time, whenever a dead body arrived, he would approach it. Through his experimentation, he discovered that he couldn't sense anything those who had perished quite some time ago before being sent to the funeral parlor, but if it were a recently deceased body, then he would be able to absorb energy from it. In less than a month, his soul power rose rapidly all the way to rank 10. However, he had no money and couldn't purchase a soul spirit. He was at a loss for what to do and could only continue to go to the funeral parlor every day to devour souls. After around another month, his body manifested a soul ring on its own, thereby giving his first soul skill, soul devouring. This soul skill allowed him to devour souls more quickly, and his targets weren't just limited to dead people now. As long as he could find someone with a very frail body or a small child, he would be able to devour a part of their soul to make them very feeble. This discovery gave him a new target. At the time, Dark Blood Demon was only a neglected and abandoned child, and he was ecstatic to have obtained this soul skill, but completely failed to realize just how dangerous it was. Thus, he began to experiment with his soul devouring soul skill, and in doing so, he discovered that not only could he devour the souls of weak humans, he could also do the same to other weaker living beings, such as small animals. One day, an extremely ill patient perished after Dark Blood Demon used the soul devouring soul skill on them, and only then did Dark Blood Demon realize the problem with his soul skill. However, at that point, he was already completely hooked. Spirit devouring allowed him to progress rapidly in his soul power cultivation, and even his spiritual power was quickly being enhanced. In contrast with his past arduous yet futile cultivation, this was a completely different experience. Thus, he gradually fell deeper and deeper into depravity. As he became more and more powerful, his first soul skill also became more and more effective and dangerous. Upon reaching rank 20 in soul power and attaining his second soul skill, his devouring spirit soul skill was already able to work on normal people. At that point, he had already well and truly become an evil soul master. In the beginning, he was still quite careful and cautious, but after a while, he began devouring souls in a completely blatant and brazen manner. In the past, he would only devour a part of someone's soul before moving on to another target, but later on, he began to devour his target souls until they passed away. He was like an addict, and there was no turning back for him. Furthermore, he discovered that if he could devour a living person's soul until they died, then that would allow him to reap the greatest benefits. The more complete the soul that he devoured, the greater the benefits that he would derive. After that, he began to notice that if the soul being devoured belonged to a soul master, then the effect would be even better, and the more powerful the soul master was, the greater the enhancements he would receive. In a very short time, he had already become an extremely renowned figure among evil soul masters, and at the same time, soul master organizations began to take notice of and target him. Joining the Holy Spirit cult was natural for him, and he progressed steadily up the ranks all the way to become one of the 4 heavenly monarchs. Even among evil soul masters, his rate of cultivation was very remarkable, and he also possessed fearsome combat prowess. In particular, his spiritual power was particularly formidable, making him an extremely difficult opponent to face. It was no exaggeration to say that the number of people Dark Blood Demon had killed was second only to Ghost Emperor and the Holy Spirit cult. Even Harissa hadn't claimed as many lives as he had. Regardless of whether it was humans or other life forms, as long as they had a soul, it would be devoured by him. However, at the same time, he was in constant agony. Each soul that he devoured would leave a trace of their consciousness in his mind, and this residual consciousness inflicted a lot of pain upon him, and this pain was unbearable. In the beginning, it was still manageable, but as he devoured more and more souls, he began to experience mental issues similar to schizophrenia, and the residual consciousness of all of the souls he had devoured harbored intense animosity toward him, constantly torturing him and causing him to burn through his life force at an alarming rate. Dark Blood Demon was actually only in his 50s, making him the youngest of the 4 heavenly monarchs, but his physical age exceeded even that of Ghost Emperor. Furthermore, he knew that if he were to die, then the residual consciousness of all of his victims would inflict extremely severe backlash upon him, to the point that his soul would be torn to shreds. Thus, he had always been searching for all types of ways to extend his own life. For example, one of his past targets had been the golden tree of Shrek Academy. In the face of the amorous Dulo, his eyes were glowing with yearning towards Zhang Xin's soul. If he wanted to repress all of the resentful wills in his body, then he had to devour a more powerful consciousness to further enhance his own spiritual power. Ghost Emperor had analyzed his situation in the past, and his verdict was that the only way for Dark Blood Demon to free himself from his current state would be to reach the divine origin realm. Only then would he be able to eradicate all of the residual consciousness. However, this was certainly far easier said than done. Even Harissa and Ghost Emperor hadn't been able to reach the divine origin realm, let alone himself. Thus, the only viable path for him was to continue to devour more and more powerful souls in order to elevate his own spiritual power to the divine origin realm before his demise. Zhang Xin wasn't a quasi-god yet, but he was still a veteran limit Dulo, and he was a perfect target. If Dark Blood Demon could devour Zhang Xin, then his powers would progress further. In fact, there was a very good chance that devouring limit Dulo would take him straight to the quasi-god level, in which case he would be one major step closer to the divine origin realm. Zhang Xin harbored nothing but hatred toward Dark Blood Demon. As one of the most powerful beings of the Holy Spirit cult, there was no doubt that Dark Blood Demon had committed countless heinous crimes against the world. This battle was an unavoidable one for both of them, and it was the best chance for him to kill Dark Blood Demon. Thus, as soon as their clash began, it quickly escalated into an all-out battle. The giant blood demon behind Dark Blood Demon reared back, and a burst of tremendous suction force instantly erupted forth. Zhang Xin's flesh began to crawl as his blood essence and soul threatened to leave his body. Spirit devouring was only Dark Blood Demon's first soul skill, but it was most definitely his most important soul skill, and it was integral to him both in battle and in cultivation. Even against extremely powerful opponents, this soul skill could weaken them to a certain extent. Chapter 1878, Amorous Dulo versus Dark Blood Demon. Zhang Xin raised his amorous sword, and emotions of fury and wrath immediately erupted out of his body. His emotional fluctuations affected his soul power, instantly making the latter scorching hot. Injecting emotions into his martial soul was a unique cultivation method employed by Zhang Xin, and in the face of Dark Blood Demon, he immediately unleashed his most powerful domain. The amorous one is left to rue what could have been. A halo expanded outward from beneath Zhang Xin's feet, and the air within the halo began to warp violently. Faced with all these emotional fluctuations, even the Blood Demon seemed to be a little lost and disoriented. Dark Blood Demon was also affected, and all of the chaotic intents in his mind erupted forth in a frenzy. He was naturally very alarmed by this, and he hurriedly drew upon his spiritual power to forcibly repress these intentions. At the same time, a layer of black flames rose up over the Blood Demon's body at his behest, keeping all of the surrounding emotional fluctuations at bay. Furthermore, 12 inky black vengeful spirits were conjured up, and they pounced towards Zhang Xin in a frenzy. Zhang Xin pointed his right index finger forward, and the amorous sword released a sword barrier, within which strong emotional fluctuations ebbed and flowed. Zhang Xin's eyes also glazed over slightly, as if he were reminiscing something, and in the next instant, his amorous sword began to glow with scintillating light as his fury suddenly turned to pain and grief. An overwhelming sense of sorrow surged forth in all directions. Zhang Xin had extensive experience in battling evil soul masters, and he knew what evil soul masters feared the most. On the flip side of their incredible power, evil soul masters were plagued by many issues, and mental instability like the type Dark Blood Demon was suffering from was extremely common. They had committed too many atrocities, and no matter how they tried to brainwash themselves, there would inevitably be psychological cracks. These cracks would widen over time if they continued to commit heinous crimes, and their mental state would eventually be affected. Thus, instead of being in a hurry to attack Dark Blood Demon, Zhang Xin was trying to draw out his opponent's innermost emotions. At the limit Dulo level, some of the past advantages that evil soul masters enjoyed could very well become detrimental to them. This was also why the Holy Spirit Dulo was so lethal to evil soul master. The 12 vengeful spirits crashed into the sword barrier over and over again, but Dark Blood Demon's emotions were also beginning to be affected. One consciousness after another arose in his mind, making it very difficult for him to focus his attention. Meanwhile, Zhang Xin wasn't exactly enjoying himself either. In the face of spirit devouring of the limit Dulo level, his mind was also beginning to be affected, and it could be clearly seen that the hair on his head was slowly yet steadily turning white strand by strand. This was a peculiar battle, and no human soul masters or abyssal creatures dared to approach them. The powers of emotions and spirit devouring were virtually omnipresent in this area, and they couldn't be kept at bay through soul power. In terms of power, the two were at a virtually identical level, but Zhang Xin held a slight upper hand due to his battle armor advantage. In contrast with their virtually completely silent battle, the clash between Cao Daja and Ghost Emperor could only be described as earth-shattering. One giant skull after another shot forth through the air, unleashing all types of attacks against Cao Daja, while Cao Daja calmly wielded his heartless sword to ward off all of the oncoming attacks in a steady manner. Green flames erupted through the air amid strings of resounding booms, and Cao Daja's eyes were glowing with a faint cold light. It was as if he had completely entered a heartless and detached state. In this state, he was able to assess everything with the utmost calmness, and he would also be able to unleash his power to its maximal extent. This wasn't the first time that he had clashed with Ghost Emperor, and Ghost Emperor had actually risen to prominence even before him. In the past, Cao Daja had almost perished by Ghost Emperor's hands, and the first time he had defeated Ghost Emperor was when he had unleashed his soul fusion skill with Zhang Xin. While attacking Cao Daja, Ghost Emperor was constantly keeping tabs on the battle between Zhang Xin and Dark Blood Demon. In the absence of Demon Sovereign, he was the one who oversaw everything in the Holy Spirit cult. Even against the likes of Atlas Dulo Yanming, he was able to hold his own, and he was undoubtedly one of the most powerful beings of the Holy Spirit Dulo. However, he was extremely wary of Cao Daja and Zhang Xin. In his eyes, the most formidable opponent from the Tang sect and Shrek Academy wasn't Wang Yeyu. In fact, before discovering that Chen Xinji had already reached the divine origin realm, he wasn't even all that wary of Chen Xinji. The only ones who caused any concern for him were Cao Daja and Zhang Xin, but not because of their individual powers. Even though Cao Daja was a quasi-god, that still wasn't enough to evoke concern within Ghost Emperor. Instead, he was much more concerned about their soul fusion skill. They were the only pair of limit Duos on this continent with a soul fusion skill, and he had once suffered a crushing defeat in the face of this soul fusion skill, so he was well aware of its power. In fact, in his eyes, the soul fusion skill was very likely the only thing that could threaten Demon Sovereign on this battlefield. Back when he had first faced this soul fusion skill, both Zhang Xin and Cao Daja had only been titled Duos, while he was already a limit Duo at the time. Despite this, Cao Daja and Zhang Xin were still able to defeat him by relying on their ultra-powerful soul fusion skill. Now that both of them were limit Duos, it was difficult for him to imagine just how powerful their soul fusion skill would be, and that was why he was so concerned. During the Shrek City bombing, the primary target had been Atlas Dulo Yanming, but at the same time, the Holy Spirit cult was very much hoping that Cao Daja and Zhang Xin would also perish in the bombing. Unfortunately for them, neither of the two were at the Tang sect headquarters, so they both survived. Thus, even while battling Cao Daja, Ghost Emperor was constantly keeping a wary eye on Zhang Xin in case they suddenly unleashed their soul fusion skill. However, ever since the two of them had become limit Duos, they were still yet to use this soul fusion skill, and no one in the Soul Master world knew why, nor just how powerful their soul fusion skill would be at their current level of power. All they could do was make assumptions based on how powerful their soul fusion skill had been in the past. Thus, Ghost Emperor was constantly prepared to retreat if the situation were to go awry. As long as he could avoid that single attack, then he would have nothing to be worried about. The soul fusion skill between Cao Daja and Zhang Xin was very extreme, and upon unleashing it once, both of them would be left completely spent. As such, Ghost Emperor was actually quite glad to see Dark Blood Demon fighting Zhang Xin. If Dark Blood Demon could take down Zhang Xin, then the threat of this soul fusion skill would be completely eradicated, and their chances of securing victory would be further increased. The only thing that he was rather befuddled about was why Demon Sovereign still hadn't taken down Yuna yet. Yuna had rushed into the Abyssal Army and was completely unstoppable, having already slain multiple Abyssal Emperors. She was currently being opposed by the Hornet Sovereign with her 12 Vajra Bomber Hornets, and they were only just barely able to contain Yuna, but it was yet to be seen just how long they could last against the Silver Dragon Spear. After all, even the Spirit Sovereign had perished by Yuna's hands. Yuna's emergence was definitely something that no one had expected. Under normal circumstances, the true god-level Demon Sovereign should be unstoppable, and if that were the case, then Yuna wouldn't be a cause for concern as she would also eventually fall to Demon Sovereign. Chapter 1879, Declaration of Identity. Son of the Sea God, Ghost Emperor was quite perplexed, while Demon Sovereign was feeling very frustrated. Her godly power was invincible, and she could sense that her power was definitely superior to Tang Wulin's, but Tang Wulin was like a swamp that was able to nullify all of her attacks no matter how powerful they were. Furthermore, the Sea God's trident really was something that could threaten her, so she had no choice but to proceed with caution, thereby resulting in this stalemate of sorts. The human army had already begun to counterattack, and a huge number of abyssal creatures had been forced to the opening of the abyssal passageway. The situation was deteriorating further and further for the abyssal plane and the Holy Spirit cult. Purplish golden light flashed through Demon Sovereign's eyes, and a burst of purplish golden light erupted violently from her body, sending Tang Wulin flying into the distance. Stop! Her thunderous cry rang out across the entire battlefield, and it was imbued with her almighty godly power and divine origin realm spiritual power. Everyone reflexively stopped as their minds were completely scattered, and in that instant, the entire sky turned a purplish golden color. Tang Wulin held his sea god's trident in his right hand and his golden dragon spear in his left as he asked, "Are you surrendering, Demon Sovereign?" Demon Sovereign was enraged to the point of bursting into laughter upon hearing this. "You sure are a cocky little brat. If it wasn't for the fact that I don't want to expend too much power here, do you think you would have been able to last this long? Continuing like this would only be a waste of time. Do you dare to accept a bet from me?" Demon Sovereign's words were clearly audible across every single corner of this battlefield, and even the abyssal creatures that didn't understand the language of the humans could derive the meaning of her words through her spiritual fluctuations. Silver light flashed, and Yuna arrived beside Tang Wulin. The two of them exchanged a glance, and Tang Wulin gave her a gentle nod. Looking at Yuna, a sense of excitement suddenly welled up in his heart. Both of them were finally standing at the pinnacle of the human race. If they could win this battle, then surely no one in this world would be able to stop them from being together. Yuna also gave him a slight nod in return as she glanced at the sea god's trident he was wielding. At this moment, the silver dragon spear in her grasp was already glowing a scintillating platinum color, and it had devoured an astronomical amount of abyssal energy. All of the powerful beings of the human race converged toward them, while the abyssal sovereigns and the powerful beings of the Holy Spirit cult gathered behind Demon Sovereign, thereby forming two distinct opposing camps. What bet would you like to propose? Tang Wuling asked. Yuna was standing beside him. As the most significant contributor on this battlefield, she had the right to represent the human race. However, she was intentionally standing a half step behind Tang Wuling by his side, handing the reins fully over to him. Tang Wuling couldn't help but think back to the time they had spent in Shrek Academy. Even back then, she had always done this. As the commander-in-chief, Guanzi didn't step forward. He merely ordered a ceasefire from the weapons in the distance. At this point, the situation on the battlefield was finally stabilized. In his eyes, with Tang Wuling and Yuna joining forces, even the true god-level Demon Sovereign would struggle to defeat the human race, and everything was progressing in a positive direction. Demon Sovereign had also recognized this trend, and that was one of the reasons she was proposing this bet. She cast a cold gaze over the faces of all of the opposing figures before finally returning his attention to Tang Wuling. She pointed at the sea god's trident in his grasp and asked, "How are you related to him?" Tang Wuling hesitated momentarily before slowly raising the glowing sea god's trident in his hand. "He's my father." Not only was Demon Sovereign stunned to hear this, even Yuna was utterly astonished, and Beast God Detian's eyes had also widened with shock. As soon as Tang Wuling returned to the battlefield, Detian had already identified the sea god's trident that he was wielding. If it weren't for this transcendent divine weapon, there was no way that Tang Wuling would have been able to oppose Demon Sovereign's godly power. 10,000 years ago, Detian had met Tang San once, and at the time, Tang San had felt like an insurmountable mountain to him. He was the true ruler of this world. As such, how could he not be astonished to hear that Tang Wuling was Tang San's son? As far as Detian could recall, Tang San seemed to have had a daughter, who became the wife of the spirit pagoda's founder. Who are you? Tang Wutong. Tang Wuling. Of course, how had he not thought of this earlier? To think that Tang Wuling was Tang San's son. No wonder he had the essence of the Golden Dragon King within his body. Everything suddenly made sense now, and he felt like he had just been struck by a stunning revelation. However, everyone else, including those from Shrek Academy and the Tang sect, was very confused. For example, there was Tongu. What's that supposed to mean? Isn't he Tang Siran's son? Why would this Demon Sovereign suddenly ask about Tang Siran? Impossible. You're only in your 20s. Demon Sovereign exclaimed. Tang Wuling took a deep breath. He was already standing at the pinnacle of the human race and had obtained the acknowledgement of the sea god's trident, so there was no need to hide anything any longer. Nothing is impossible in this world. That's what my foster father told me at a very young age. He also told me that the only one anyone can absolutely trust and rely on in this world is themselves. I was left in this world by my father due to some special circumstances. You don't need to know the exact reason. All you need to know is that I am the son of the sea god, Tang San. You guessed right. This is the transcendent divine weapon of the sea god, the sea god's trident. He wasn't just saying this for Demon Sovereign to hear, but also for all of his friends, and everyone, regardless of whether they were friend or foe, was astonished to hear this. This was downright unimaginable. One had to realize that Tang San had ascended 20,000 years ago. How could he possibly have a son that was only in his 20s? Yuna swayed unsteadily on the spot, and a hint of sorrow flashed through her eyes. In the next instant, everyone erupted into chaotic discussion, and Shrek's 6 monsters were all more shocked than anyone else. They had always been the most familiar and closest friends to Tang Wuling, and they had always been perplexed by his incredible rate of progression and his Golden Dragon King abilities, but they merely attributed that to a martial soul mutation. Who could have imagined that he would be Tang San's son? However, they didn't doubt this claim. After all, they had known him for so many years, and Tang Wuling was currently representing the Tang sect in Shrek Academy, so there was no way he would lie about something like this. Tang San was the founder of the Tang sect, so there was no way that Tang Wuling would desecrate his name by telling a lie like this, and on top of that, he would gain nothing from it anyway. Thus, at this point, everyone was more shocked than anything else. After a brief moment of astonishment, Demon Sovereign slowly calmed down, and her eyes began to glow with unbridled resentment. Chapter 1880, the deep-sea demonic whale king that was abandoned by the sea god. I knew you were related to him somehow, but I didn't think the connection would be this strong. That's even better for me. Your father killed my husband, so it's time I repaid the favor by killing his son. Tang Wuling folded slightly upon hearing this. My father killed your husband. Right at this moment, someone within the Holy Spirit cult camp abruptly threw a hand over her own mouth to stop herself from yelling out loud. Her eyes were instantly brimming with tears. Never did it occur to her that he could be the son of Tang San. Demon Sovereign's voice was trembling slightly from strong emotions as she said, 20,000 years ago, my husband reigned supreme in the sea. He was the true king of sea soul beasts, the 1 million-year-old deep-sea demonic whale king. It was your father who killed my husband just so he could get his hands on my husband's soul ring and soul bones. Tang Wuling was very surprised to hear this. You're a soul beast. Are you also a deep-sea demonic whale? That's right, Demon Sovereign replied in a proud manner. I am the current leader of the deep-sea demonic whales. Your father killed my husband and forced me and my daughter into a perilous life on the run. I had to go through countless hardships to get to where I am today. All humans are greedy and irredeemable. You destroyed the habitat of our soul beasts and drove the soul beasts on land to near extinction, but that wasn't enough. You had to go after our sea soul beasts as well. Hold on. Tang Wuling suddenly interrupted with a befuddled expression. I admit that we humans have excessively slaughtered soul beasts, but your husband's case seems to be more complicated than that. A furious look appeared on Demon Sovereign's face. How is it any different? Tang Wuling replied. I've experienced something similar, so I know that there's a difference. You must be the deep-sea demonic whale king that I sensed in the sea not long ago, right? At the time, you must have sensed my sea god's trident and my father's aura, which is why you decided to flee. An astonished look appeared on Tang Wuling's face. That was you. At the time, she had only just completed her breakthrough, and she had indeed sensed something. Even though the Blood River Godslayer array was destroyed, the power that it had bestowed upon her was sufficient for her to make the breakthrough. During her breakthrough, she felt as if she had had a dream where she was teleported to another world. In the dream, she clearly sensed a familiar aura. It was the aura of the sea god's trident and of sea god Tang San himself, and it was this very same aura that had taken her husband's life. Her first reaction was to charge ahead and destroy the source of that aura, but she quickly began to cower in the face of enormous pressure that was being exerted upon her. In the end, she decided to flee, and that was when she awoke from what she had thought had been a dream, but she was unable to tell whether it had been an illusion or reality. Upon hearing Tang Wuling's mention of the incident, she now knew that it had been reality. In that case, didn't that mean that sea god Tang San really had left his power in this world? Tang Wuling continued. I went into seclusion on this occasion for the sole purpose of completing the trials of the sea god's trident. One of those trials was to face the deep-sea demonic whale king, but seeing as the past deep-sea demonic whale king had already perished by my father's hands, you had to have been my opponent in that trial, right? Demon Sovereign wore a cold expression as she asked. So what if that's the case? Tang Wuling said. At the time, you chose to flee, so I passed that trial very easily. I didn't know what had happened, but it's all clear to me now. The sea god's trident is a transcendent divine weapon, and in order to gain its acknowledgement, one has to undergo its trials. In order to become its wielder, one has to endure the 9 trials of the sea god. All 9 trials are extremely difficult, but there's a point and purpose to all of them. For example, there was the trial where I had to help the demon spirit great white sharks force back the evil spirit orcas. The evil spirit orcas had been slaughtering too many living beings, thereby affecting the entire marine ecosystem. One of the sea god's most important duties is to protect the sea, so the purpose of that trial was to restore balance in the ecosystem. In that case, why had my father killed what was once the most powerful sea soul beast? My father was also undergoing the 9 trials of the sea god when he was pitted against the deep-sea demonic whale king. Can you tell me what your husband did to deserve that? Can you tell me why the sea god abandoned him and asked my father to kill him? Tang Wuling had just uncovered many secrets of the Dulo continent, particularly regarding sea god Tang San. Only brief mentions of the 9 trials of the sea god had been made in historical records, but they were nowhere near this detailed, and his words provided further evidence supporting the claim that he was the son of the sea god. All of the powerful beings in the human camp were struck by a sense of enlightenment, and they couldn't help but see Tang Wuling through new eyes. Tang San was the most legendary figure in the history of the Dulo continent with no one else even coming close. The fact that Tang Wuling was his son was an astonishing revelation. Lies. Demon Sovereign roared with fury as a massive pillar of purplish golden light erupted from her body, heading directly toward Tang Wuling. Tang Wuling drew a circle in the air with his sea god's trident to nullify the attack, then said, "You know full well whether I'm lying or not. In fact, through your actions, you've proven to me that I'm not lying. You took over 10 million innocent lives to create your blood river god slayer array. Should you not die for this heinous crime? Should the sea god bless and protect a sea soul beast like you? Your actions have shown everyone the truth. Even if your husband hadn't committed atrocities of the same magnitude as you, he had still definitely done something to threaten the entire ocean." Demon Sovereign's breathing had become very heavy as she glowered intently at Tang Wuling. Was he right? He was. How had the past deep-sea demonic whale king been able to attain 1 million year level power? Was it actually through living for 1 million years? That was naturally impossible. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1 million years. That was a hierarchy of soul beasts. But in reality, very few soul beasts actually took the same number of years to reach the corresponding level. Instead, most of them progressed through breakthroughs, and the way that the past deep-sea demonic whale king had achieved his breakthroughs was extremely barbaric and heinous. He devoured living beings just like Dark Blood Demon, except he devoured both the bodies and souls of his victims. In the sea, the deep-sea demonic whale king was virtually invincible, and in order to attain more power, he constantly fed on the weak to nurture himself. In particular, after he reached the 100,000 year level, he began to up the ante, and many vast regions of the sea were reduced to lifeless wastelands because of him. After reaching the 1 million year level, he became even more brazen and unrestrained. Just like the evil soul masters on land, the deep-sea demonic whale king at the time intended to devour all of the living beings in the sea in order to attain godhood. The only times the deep-sea demonic whale king ever showed compassion was in the presence of his wife and daughter, but his actions had heavily impacted the entire marine ecosystem, which was why Tang San was tasked with killing him in one of the 9 trials of the sea god. Demon Sovereign seemed to have calmed down again as she appraised Tang Wuling with a cold expression. "There's no need to waste any more time with words. You're the son of Tang San, so you'll be the perfect target for me to exact my revenge on. Do you dare to accept my bet?" Tang Wuling replied, "Tell me what you propose. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.